Good morning to you, Sajid Javid.
Good morning.
Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Fascinating article. Some would say very brave article to be written by a former Health Secretary. Britons are sicker than people in many other Western countries as a direct consequence of the way the NHS is set up. Tell us why you think that.
Well, look, this week, as a country, we'll be celebrating the 75th birthday of the NHS, and it's right that we do, but we also should be having a serious conversation about its future. And when we look at health outcomes, because at the end of the day, that's what matters most, and compare the outcomes in this country to similar countries with universal healthcare systems, other rich countries, we're not doing as well as we should. And that's where demand is surging, but it's surging in other countries as well. They've got the same issues as us, aging and new drugs and new treatments to pay for. But in Britain, we have too many people that are waiting, whether it's for GPs or A&E or ops. And the problem is, Julia, that everyone knows this. What I've just set out, everyone can see this. They certainly know this in Westminster. But whenever the NHS and its future is discussed in Parliament, it immediately becomes a political football. There's a narrative of adulation that everyone wants to lean into, despite the problems and challenges. We need to detoxify this debate. We need a serious and dispassionate assessment and look to the future, and that's why I'm calling for a Royal Commission. But
this is the key thing, isn't it? It's the sacred cow. There's lots of talk. Oh, it's the NHS's birthday tomorrow. Envy of the world. It hasn't been the envy of the world for quite some decades now. It was a magnificent, amazing, wonderful achievement when it was set up in 1948. But it is interesting that no other country copied the way we'd set it up. And we're constantly told, if it's not the NHS as it exists now, then the only alternative is the United States of America and their bizarre system, massive inequalities, 3 times the cost percentage of GDP with some pretty bad health outcomes. But actually the rest of the Western world does manage to have healthcare. It may not always be free at the point of demand, but actually the outcomes for people, even in the poorest homes, is better.
Well, in so many other countries, countries that we would you'd like to compare ourselves against, whether it's Germany, it's France, it's Australia, it's New Zealand, it's Denmark, those kinds of countries, they have universal healthcare systems, and the word universal meaning that everyone gets high-quality healthcare regardless of their personal means. And they have better, on average, they're having better health outcomes. Yeah. And it's not a question of money. Just yesterday, the OECD, which is a club of rich countries, I think they look at the 36 or so top rich countries in the world, they published a league table, and we were the 6th best funded health service out of 30-odd rich countries. Yeah. It's not about, we've never spent so much money in real terms per head on the NHS. Its budget is bigger than the GDP of Greece. It's equivalent to 44% of day-to-day government spending. This is not a question of money. Almost all those other countries I mentioned, I think all of them spend less money than we do as a percentage of GDP, but they get better health outcomes. And therefore, we need to work out why this is happening and be honest about it instead of just pretending that everything is fine.
Well, you said that actually privately, not just Tories but Labour MPs admit that it's not working. We know the Shadow Health Secretary, Wes Streeting, has actually said some, I would say quite brave things for a Shadow Health Secretary for Labour about not sort of worshipping the sacred cow of the NHS. But do you think a Royal Commission, isn't that just kicking this into the long grass? Every time we've had a Royal Commission on pensions or on this or on that, it's just another way of it becoming a talking shop in Westminster, and nothing ever changes for another 2 decades.
Well, I wish we didn't have to have a Royal Commission. I wish that the best outcome here was that politicians, Parliament, could sort this out for itself. But as I say, that's not going to happen. And it's certainly all the time I've been in Parliament, but all the years before that, it's obvious that whenever this issue is discussed, that anyone that says something remotely sensible but controversial will have their head shot off. And Royal Commissions are there for a reason. We rightly don't have them that often. I think there's only been 2 or 3 since 1990. And I'm not sitting here pretending that have a Royal Commission, everything's fine. It's a process, but I think that process, we've got to recognise the weaknesses in debate today. That process begins with a Royal Commission, and then when that Royal Commission reports, then it's for the government of the day to determine what happens next. But I think it'd be hard for them to ignore that, and it's a proper democratic process because still, an elected parliament will have to decide.
Can I ask you also, Fine, you're not just a former Health Secretary, you're a former Chancellor as well. There's a Treasury investigation being launched into banks closing the accounts of politicians and others. They don't like Nigel Farage's account, said was closed. Richard Tyson, Lawrence Fox of the Reform and UK and Reclaim parties, respectively, have had their accounts closed or found difficulty opening accounts. We even had Dominic Lawson saying his daughter's account was closed because she was the granddaughter of the former Chancellor of the Exchequer, Nigel Lawson. Is this an issue that you are concerned about?
Yeah, look, I've seen this story, and it does really trouble me, actually. I mean, whether it's Richard Tyson, Lawrence Fox, or Nigel, I mean, those three people, there's probably a lot I disagree with them on, but what I do think is that they should have every right to say what they want, and no bank has the right to close their account solely because they disagree with their customers' lawfully expressed views. I just think that's outrageous, actually, and I think there's not much to look at here. I think the government can act immediately and just tell these banks that you just cannot do
Well,
it.
it tells them that, and then what do? The banks carry on doing it, but they just give some spurious reason. I mean, we know that a lot of these banks are members of the Stonewall Diversity Scheme, so I'm waiting for my bank account to be closed because I won't accept that men can become women.
Well, look, I think if the government tells the bank, certainly through the regulators, because I don't think this is, my view is I don't think this is lawful in any case, and it should be made absolutely clear, because I'm not aware that any rule that allows banks to close someone's account solely because of the views that they're expressing, as long as those views are lawful, and because we're in a free country and people have a right to free speech, and that is sacrosanct. I don't think any bank can say to you, you can't have an account because we disagree with your point of view.
Sajid Javid, really good to talk to you. Still a Conservative MP, former Health Secretary and former Chancellor as well. 8:32 is the time. This is Talk Breakfast.